Can you imagine spending your career uncovering fraud, corruption, and the secrets powerful people have spent millions trying to protect? Then walking into a therapy session only to discover that 45 years of your own buried truth was about to come rushing to the surface. Welcome to the WTF podcast, friends. My name is Molly Smith, and I'm on a mission to equip a million people with the tools to recognize when they're in the funk, but more importantly, how to pivot out of it. By tuning in today, you have joined me on this mission, and I am so glad you are here. My guest today spent 32 years as a forensic accountant, investigating fraud, exposing corruption, and uncovering the secrets that very powerful people desperately wanted buried. She was, by every measure, someone who knew how to find the truth. What Beth didn't know was that the deepest secret of all was buried deep inside of her. Then one hypnotherapy session changed everything and sent her on a journey of profound healing that became the foundation of the work that she does today. Beth is a healing mentor, best-selling author, and the creator of the Heal Framework because she believes that the destination of every healing journey is the same place: love. Please join me in welcoming Beth Jones to the WTF podcast. Hi, my friend.
Oh, such a great introduction, Molly. Thank you. I love it. Fantastic. I should just have you record that for me. I was 15 on my website.
Yeah, there you go.
Fantastic.
It's your story. We're here to share it. This is like your background isn't so fascinating, and the story, it will just, everybody buckle up. It's going to be a good one. Okay, so just to get us started, because the hypnotherapy session was literally the turning point. So tell us, before the hypnotherapy session, who did you think you were?
I wish I knew. That's a great question. I used to describe this point, what you're asking me about, in the context of my professional life.
Sure.
And I wouldn't talk about my personal life at all. So my professional life, when I would talk about it, I would say to people like, wow, I can look over there and see that woman, that very accomplished woman with the title I carried. And toward the end of that career, which ended after the hypnotherapy session, but I would look at her and I was like, who is that person? Right? Like, classic imposter syndrome is what we know it as, or what I know it as now. Right. But I literally had like this out of body experience where I could not reconcile the me that I felt like with the me that was that person. And I was a super high performer. And I mean, I was really good at what I did, and it shot up through the ranks of every organization I had worked for. I was a partner for over 10 years in firms, and I mean, just really good, but I could not make the reconciliation. And the personal part of my life, as I said, just completely, I didn't even really focus on it or talk about it. Now it was in shambles, and there's a stark dichotomy between the professional me, that very successful, all put together person, and the personal me, which I describe that life as just being a busyholic and chronic chaos, and just chaos that I was creating. And my first husband, we created a lot of chaos together. So it was very, and whereas my work life was very structured and very organized. So there was a stark dichotomy between the two, but I never, like I said, never really talked about it. So, I mean, I know who that person was, but it's just hard to explain sitting where I am today.
Yeah. That's fascinating that it really was very different, the personal and the professional.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there are things about my personal life, behaviors about my personal life that I've actually only started to talk about publicly in recent months that people who knew me in that professional setting would be like, no way, that is not the same person. I mean, even Eddie, my husband, now he's like, I can't even reconcile that person who you're describing with who you are now. And, I mean, and I've healed, and, we've passed a lot of that, but it's just a stark dichotomy.
Okay. So you originally sought out hypnotherapy because you wanted to become a better leader, to connect with people differently. What were you
wasn't about becoming a better leader. It was to connect with people, connecting with people. That was the phrase. Those were the exact words that I said to her when I walked into her office, right? This is why I'm here, because I'm having trouble connecting with people. That's how I described it.
In the professional setting. In the personal
that
setting.
was a broad comment. And it was pretty much in every
aspect
type of relationship that I had. I just, I just really could not talk about me or go deep in a conversation with someone. And I think that's because that would have required me to actually know who I am, and I didn't back then, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
just explained. I mean, I could literally look at that person and go, "Wow, who are you?" Right? So, like
Yeah.
reconciling all of that got in the way of me being able to develop relationships with people. And then, I mean, I don't know exactly where we're going in the conversation, but I'm going to go
Sure.
ahead and jump a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
what
Go
I
for it.
ultimately discovered was this massive wall that I lived behind. And it
Mhm.
was that wall that literally kept me separated from everybody in my life and caused me to push a lot of people out, right? But I could not go to any depth of intimacy. And I use that across all kind of relationships, whatever the
Sure.
appropriate type of intimacy is. But
Sure.
mentally, emotionally, like I could not make those type of connections with
Yeah.
people. I just didn't have the ability to do
Were
that.
you cognizant of the fact that there was a wall there?
No, I did not know the wall existed.
Okay.
I just knew I just could look around me at that point in time and just could see the state of my relationships, but I couldn't understand why. And I guess I knew because I said, I'm having trouble connecting with people. I went to her saying, help me. So I
Right.
knew it was me, but I could not understand why. I had not identified that yet.
Okay. And so, my question really was like, what were you hoping to solve? And it sounds like it was just connecting with people.
Yeah, I want deeper relationship. I want people in my life. I want deeper relationships. And, I had been the only constant from a relationship standpoint at that point in time in my life was my first husband, who I had been with. That was in 16. So I'd been with him in the late 20 something years. I can do the math exactly.
Sure.
So I guess we've been together, I guess, 26 years at that point in time, and maybe a little bit longer. But that, I mean, even that, there was no connection in that relationship
Yeah.
either, right? I would go on to learn about that, my role in
Yes.
that relationship, but not even there. So I literally looked around me and felt like I didn't have any close relationships.
Yeah.
And that, and I've had a conversation, actually had a conversation recently with a guy on my podcast about unconscious bias. And we were talking about like, what's the solution to
Yeah.
unconscious bias? Because by definition, you don't know it's there, right? You're
That's right.
unconscious to it, right? And
Right.
he said to me, conscious living. And
Mm.
what he meant by that, one of the points that he brought out in that was like literally to look around you, open your eyes and look. And I suppose that's what I was beginning to do, to
Mhm.
open my eyes and look around to say, what's wrong with this landscape around me? And it's every relationship. So the common denominator must be me.
Right.
And that's why I was seeking the help.
That's good.
I had done a lot of traditional therapy
Okay.
before the hypnotherapy, but I was not
Okay.
actively in therapy at
Okay.
the time. And that's because for 25 years, I had felt like I need to be in therapy for one reason or another, but I could never name it, never identify. And
Sure.
I never got help because I couldn't say it. I never found a therapist who could even help me to dig in and explain some of
Get
the
it out.
things that I was doing to try to pinpoint it. So
Good.
hypnotherapy really was the beginning of my real healing journey.
Okay. So take us into that session. At what point, or was there a point where you realized that this was becoming something much bigger than you expected?
Well, I didn't know that until I came back to conscious awareness, because you're doing the work in you're in the subconscious state and doing
Mm.
the work, and I knew like from the second she said, one, Beth, why are you here? And I knew immediately why I was there. I mean, the work was happening immediately and I stepped in, and I get cold chills when I think about this. So I immediately became my 8-year-old self, and I'm in a house that I recognized for the very first time. And that house had been in this recurring nightmare I've been having for 15 years. That nightmare began, of course, hindsight's 2020. So I
Of
now know the
course.
story, right?
Mm.
That nightmare began when my aunt told her daughters that she had been sexually abused almost her entire life growing up by her father.
Mm.
When she made that disclosure, I had my memory of being abused by that same person, my grandfather, when I was 5. Right. So those came very close together. And then they just kind of sat there. And then this nightmare started very quickly after that. And I had it for 15 years. I had no idea what it meant. I never recognized the house. But in the
Yeah.
moment when she said, why are you here? I'm 8 years old, and I immediately drop into a house, and I recognize it as both the house in my nightmare and a house that I had actually been in, where my grandparents had lived at one time.
Oh my gosh.
And it was just like this epic saga that actually went on for a very long time, which I think you know about hypnotherapy.
I do.
That process, you're usually only, as I understand it, I've only done it once, but as I understand it, you're only in the subconscious state for about 45-ish minutes.
Yeah.
I was in that state for almost 3 hours because I'm terrified. I'm my 8-year-old me, absolutely panic stricken, terrified as a young child would be. And it's this whole saga about my grandfather trying to find me, and I'm hiding from him and just terrified that he's going to find me and hurt me. And then I end up outside of the house, right? So she's trying to, like, I think she's like, oh, she was like, WTF, what's going on with this woman, right? So she was like, we got to get her out of this, you know. And I had, of course, established my safe place, which was a beach, but she couldn't get me back to the beach. And so she was working to get me out of the house. So we did get me out of the house. And I calmed down for a little bit because there actually was this playground swing set that I loved when I had been there as a kid outside of that house. And I got there, right? And so I was there. I'm like, oh, you know, I'm playing fun. Oh, you know, well, now here comes my grandfather out of the house. And so then I go into this epic battle, this 8-year-old child in this epic battle with the house to keep him in the house, fighting to keep him in the house. And we're trying to destroy the house with him in it, which I was not able to do. But ended up wrapping this house in a bubble, which I got to levitate off the ground. But for whatever reason, that was like secure enough. And she was able to actually get me to the beach just momentarily and then bring me back out.
Back out.
And then when I came to, that was the WTF moment.
Yeah.
Because I was like, because when I came to, like, those three events that were random in my mind, what my aunt had disclosed, my memory, and this nightmare, like, it all came rushing together. I was like, oh, I was abused, sexually abused when I was young. I'm like, it just, like, the stark realization that I was a trauma survivor hit me. But the even more terrifying thing for me is that I also had a stark realization that the overwhelming feeling was, I have no idea who I am. And if I don't know me, nobody else can possibly know me. And that was terrifying to me. But it was the beginning of my understanding this disconnect from people was in that moment. It was absolutely, I mean, that's been June 19th is my 6-year anniversary. And like, I have like full on, I don't know if you can see, I'm like the hair on my body is standing up everywhere right now because it's so real and so raw when I think back to that feeling that I had when I came back to conscious awareness.
Yeah. Okay. So you've said that this experience, this hypnotherapy experience, was like a death and a rebirth event. What died in that room for you?
That person that we talked about in the beginning that I could just kind of tell you things about her. That person died. Yeah. And this me, like the person who I was born to be, who I actually am before my trauma and my human conditioning, that person was reborn. But the person who had been suffering for 45 years at that point in time, she died.
Yeah.
And I was born. And I walked out of that room and have gone on to find myself.
Yes. Okay. Well,
yeah.
Okay. So at this point, you're living in Hong Kong.
Yes.
Correct. And you have this 3-hour session. What does the following weeks look like for you?
Yeah, so I almost immediately fell into a very deep depression. You know, I got home that day. The other major event that happened that day is that I saw my ex-husband for who he truly was, for the very, or who he is. I don't know. I don't know how to see him a long time. I'm assuming he's still that person. Maybe not. I don't know. But the person who he was and had been for our entire relationship, I saw him for the first time. And that was really hard because, I told you, I was like panic stricken terror. I had been like sobbing, uncontrollable, wailing, crying like a terrified child. And then afterward, I'm crying because I'm like, I'm dying. Like that me that walked in is dying, right? I'm going through that whole process. And that was just overwhelming to me. And so I had been crying by the time I got home for probably, I'm going to say 5 or 6 hours. And I am not a Hollywood crier. Not like, it's not pretty, right? So I'm like all puffed up and red and swollen.
Yeah.
And there was no compassion and no empathy for
Oh.
me at all when I walked in the door. And in
Mm.
fact, he immediately reverted to who he always is, where what was happening to me was about him, like how it was affecting him.
Yeah.
And that, so I have like this succession of things happen in this one day, and I am in a state of bewilderment, which pushed me to a very dark and desolate place. And,
Mm.
for about 3 weeks, it was really difficult for me. Now, in those 3 weeks, within a matter of days, I left the apartment that we were living in Hong Kong because I couldn't deal with him and I just needed to be alone. I
Sure.
left the apartment and checked myself into a hotel for about, I don't know, I was probably there about 10 days. And I spent a lot of time. And there's this beautiful park called Hong Kong Park that has this amazing bird aviary. And I spent a lot of time in those 10 days in that park, in that aviary, just like pouring out and I didn't care what. I mean, I got snot flying all over the place. I'm yelling. I'm, like
Yeah.
letting my anger out. And I didn't care what I mean, people thought probably thought I was a raving lunatic. I didn't care. I was just trying
Who
to get
cares?
the emotion out. And the birds were
Yes.
taking it. They were like, okay, we'll take it. Right. And
Yeah.
so that was about 10 days. In those 10 days, I had a couple of friends of mine come to dinner one night and I told them what was happening to me. And that night was the first night that I ever knew that I was experiencing unconditional love. And they actually gave me information that night that moved me forward, that got me to my trauma therapist and into a support group
Oh,
for
good.
femme survivors of sexual assault, whether it, they doesn't matter if it happened if you were a child or an adult in
Yeah.
this particular support group. And I was shocked to find either one of those things in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But that was probably about a 3 weeks. So that was June 19th. I saw Monica, my therapist, and I went the first support group meeting I attended, I think was on July 3rd. So it was a
Okay.
short period of time because I'm an optimist by nature, right? I am the world is beautiful and I am, the glass is 3/4 full kind of girl, right? Even despite the challenges in my life and how I was
Right.
living, that
Yeah.
was just my outlook on life. Always very hopeful. Everything could be overcome. There's no problem that we can't solve, right?
Right.
And so while I was in this place of like, this is like the biggest problem I've ever faced, but I had that inside of me. So even though so it's like I had this internal battle between the feeling that I had never felt before of this just darkness and isolation and just probably depressed for a short period of time, right? But it was this battle against me, like I'm this is not me. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
stay in this place, right? I have to do
Right.
something. But it was a progression over a little bit of time to move myself, right? To remove myself from something that was very uncomfortable with my ex-husband, being in that same environment with him, going to a place where I had peace. I could begin to let my emotions out, which I had never done for
Never.
45 years. That
Right.
process
Oh,
started
yes.
almost immediately in that park and in that aviary. And then saying the words for the first time, right?
Yeah.
Talking. The first time the words ever came out of my mouth, I've been sexually abused. I was sexually abused as a child, right? The first time those words ever came out of my mouth was that night to my two friends, right? Which, I mean,
Mm.
that is one of the most profound steps that any of us can take when we're releasing a
Absolutely.
trauma event is to speak the words of it, right? And
Hmm.
so that was a very rapid progression, and I stayed in that place of like bewilderment, like just because then what I started discovering about my life was just coming in waves, right?
Yes.
I have a picture of myself that was, probably taken probably about 6 months into the healing journey. So around the end of that year, 2020. Um, and like when I look at it, I can just see the sheer exhaustion on my face. And it wasn't just the exhaustion of my life, but it was the exhaustion of the healing journey at that point in time. So even though I
Yes.
was making progress discovering who I am, uncovering what had happened to me and dealing with all of my coping mechanisms that were terrible and all that deep work that I was doing, called the self-discovery work, I was still, I mean, it was a lot. It was overwhelmed. So I carried that for a
Yeah.
period of time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. And
Yeah.
so during this 6 months, so July, you get into the group and you meet up with
Mhm.
your therapist and you're doing this work. It's 2020, the middle of the pandemic. You're living abroad.
In Hong Kong, one of the worst places you could have been for the pandemic in terms of lockdown protocol.
Absolutely. What's going on with your marriage?
Yeah. So 5 weeks after that event, so by the end of July, my ex-husband had left Hong Kong, and this is his story and what was going on with him. The short version is that he had some like physical therapy he was trying to go through, and he some
Sure.
other things from some surgeries that he had, and he was trying to find, what he'll tell you is that he was trying to find a place where he could get to physical therapy easier than he could in Hong Kong. I'm going to take out my little violin and go wham, because and so he ended up leaving at the end of July, and he went to Bangkok, and that he left July 21st, and that was the last time I ever saw him in person. Less than 5 weeks later, he was gone. And, and so by the end of August, I knew that the marriage was not going to survive what I was going through. And then it was just the period that you go through. Like, I knew it inside of me, and I probably even had said it to my friends at that point in time, like, it's on the rocks.
Right.
So, it's not, I probably didn't even say we're in trouble. I think it's just not going to survive what I'm going through. And, but, I'd been with him for a very long time. By the time we separated, we'd been together 33 years from the time we started dating. And so, you do what you do, right? Can we save this? And,
Of course.
I knew we tried again for the third time. We tried couples therapy. That was a complete waste of time. The thing about my ex and I is that we were always very respectful of each other, right? And so, and there was, like empathy and compassion for the being, but he did not have empathy and compassion for what I was experiencing or what I was going through. And I think he had empathy and compassion for the person who I was, that mask I wore for him, who I performed, which was somebody who took care of everything. I did everything.
Sure.
Everything. And that's the person he wanted. And that person was going away because I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. To a lot of things, not just my marriage, but I'm not performing for anybody anymore. Right. And so that was all coming off everywhere, at work. Everywhere. My family, with him. And so I think that's what he began to struggle with from his side. That's probably how I would describe it, right? And he knew what I was doing. I was very clear. I'm healing. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm in. Therapy. I'm in the sport group. I'm talking, reading like crazy. I was listening to podcasts. I was consuming massive amounts of information to educate myself as a survivor. That's what I wanted to understand, was me as a survivor, not me as a victim, me as the survivor, right? And so, and I was sharing, because I obviously know some of his history, a lot of his history, and I could see him. I'm like, you're a survivor too, right? And I was like, come on, you can do this. And he just refused. And he would say things to me like, I feel like we're in the train depot and you're a locomotive and you're shooting out the door and you're going faster and faster like a speeding train, and I just can't hang on. I just can't keep up. Right. So this goes on from August until February. And, we're having these, like, I didn't emote for 45 years. Right. Like, I literally, like, every emotion went into a wall, literally every single one. Right.
Sure.
Not anymore. They are popping all, and they were not good, and so I'm like this roller coaster. And he was like, who is this person? You're scaring me. He would say it to me all the time. You're scaring me. Yeah. Great. I'm scaring you. Wonderful. That's helpful. Right. Yeah. So we're dealing with all of this, my emotions. And, of course, those emotions are not helpful when you're trying to move forward in a relationship like that. And what I knew moving toward the end, I'm guessing he probably felt it too. So go through all this for a few months. And then finally in February, he had a very spiritual event one morning involving a dragonfly, which is my spirit animal. And he called me and he said, it's time for me to set you free. And I said, yes, it is. And
thank you. That was it.
It was just, we spent the rest of that year. That was February 2021. We spent the rest of that year negotiating the divorce settlement, which was painful.
Yeah.
And I gave up a lot. I bought my freedom, is what I tell people. And I did. But I was free by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
okay.
It did not survive.
Yeah. And in a relationship situation, you can only go as deep as the most shallow person, right? So if somebody's not willing to go there with you, especially when you've uncovered this massive thing that you've uncovered, I can't imagine many would probably, unless they were very emotionally aware, survive that kind of healing and transformation. What happened in your career during that time? Had you stayed in Hong Kong and
Great question.
were you showing up differently at work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one of the things that I think is really important and what I got right from the beginning, because I had a big job, I had a lot of responsibility and a lot of accountability. So,
Yeah.
I had been promoted not too long, 3 months before this happened to me, I'd been promoted where I was the leader of our investigations practice across Asia. And at the same time, I was um, co-partner on a massive export controls investigation involving a Chinese company. It was all over the world. I mean, in government agencies, and they were really angry at this company. And so it was a very difficult case, a lot of moving parts. And so I'm trying to co-manage this project as well. So two very big jobs. And what I realized almost immediately when I was in those first few weeks, like when I realized my mental state, I knew I had to get help because everybody else was going to suffer. And I wasn't going to do that to the people who were relying on me. And so I had to start
Yeah.
telling them what was happening. And so the very first person I told was my boss. I didn't have any choice. I told him and I told the head of our human resources in Asia. We're the
Yeah.
very first two people and my partner on the project, right? There were the first three people that in that succession. So it was John and then Demi and then Brett. I told the three of them probably in the same day, this is what's happening. And without fail, every single one of them was like, what can we do to help you? And so I was able to get that help and that support, but I also found it very necessary to speak with the team, the people below me who were reporting to me that I was leading and managing and on down the line. And that continued. So I went into this space where the right thing to do was to be very transparent, authentic, vulnerable, all those lovely words that
Oh,
we throw
yeah.
around today that I don't think most people still even know really what that means, right? But I'm telling you right now what it means, right? I am bearing my soul to these people about what had happened to me in the hypnotherapy and like whatever I had just discovered or learned or was in the process of figuring out about
Sure.
myself.
Yeah.
And what I found from that is so, I'm an American, right? And I'm a woman and I'm in Hong Kong. I'm in a multicultural environment. But what I found, and I was, at that point, I'd been in my career, I don't know, 27, 28 years at that point in time, very
Yeah.
senior. But what I found is that people leaned into me, and a
Mhm.
lot of them leaned into me with Me Too stories, which
Yeah.
is disturbing. They were leaning into me, and maybe not the exact story as mine, but some variation of trauma, Me Too
Sure.
story, right? But I found that it was happening. It didn't matter. Like the age gap was closing. I mean, I had young people coming into
Yeah.
me and talking about it. I had men coming to me and talking about it. And the cultural divide was not there. It didn't matter, right?
Mhm.
Because trauma and survivorship, there are no demographic boundaries whatsoever. I just became
Agreed.
human. I was very human. And that is when we talk
Mhm.
about authenticity and vulnerability, that's what it
Yes.
means to be your
Yeah.
whole human self. And because I did that and I was doing it in a way to say, look, I know I might not be myself right now, and this is what's happening with me. It was like everybody just rallied around me. They're like, oh, and it was actually an amazing, wonderful experience. And it's what I
Yeah.
tell people now from a leadership perspective, right? From a professional perspective, I think it's a more interesting conversation the more senior someone is, because doing what I did is people think, oh, that's riskier, right? Like, if I'm younger in my
Yeah.
career, okay, but when I'm senior and I'm supposed to have it all figured out, that's really a risky step to take.
Right.
But it was the right step. And I think it is the right step to take.
I think it's fascinating that the people that you worked with, that you were closest to on the job, had the best reaction, but the
Yes.
person you were living with and you've been in a
Yes.
relationship with over for 33 years,
No,
not even remotely.
no,
Wow.
only.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so everything that you have gone through and we're going through in that season has ultimately shaped what you're doing today.
Yes.
So tell me about the HEAL framework and what you are doing today and how this experience of healing that you've gone through has created that foundation.
Yeah. So the heal framework is my how to heal. That's the framework that I use
Okay.
to teach people how to heal. This is what a healing journey looks like, what it is. So
Mm,
HEAL is an acronym. It means to hope, evolve, and love. And
mm,
that's because those are the elements that we need in order to heal, right? So
yeah.
hope, hope is the fuel for the healing journey, right? So fostering
Mm,
hope every day. And I don't mean in the cheesy affirmation kind of way, although that is what we use and we get to use them, right? But I'm talking about like really finding, like knowing from
mm,
your own experience, seeing other
yes.
people heal, hearing the accounts of other people like me, what I'm telling you right now, I've done it,
Mhm, mm,
and seeing it in your own life, right? Those are the things that fuel us. The yes, I can do this kind of fuel, right? That's
yeah.
what hope is. And that's what we're fostering every day.
Mm,
That's what keeps us going, because if you don't have it, you'll quit on this journey because it's hard.
it's
And
hard.
it's really
Mm,
hard in the evolve part, right? Which is
mm,
why the E is evolve for me, right? Because this is where we actually do the work. It's the active part of healing. And this is
yeah.
using whatever tools that work for us. And I talked about a couple of mine already, but I've got a lot of others that I use. This is where we figure out what those tools are that really work for us, how they work for us, and we use them as we're doing the deep self discovery work to really
Yes.
go inside to understand who we are, like what happened to me,
Right.
what have my survival mechanisms been, like, how are these things shaping my life. Things like purpose come up in that work, right? Which
Oh,
I'm saying
yeah.
that intentionally because that's what
Mhm,
ultimately I discovered. My purpose is what led me to the work that I'm doing today. I'm actually living in my purpose today, right?
mm,
So that self-discovery work, it's hard because we're looking at the trauma, the pain, the suffering that have caused us to, let's use my metaphor, live behind the wall, right? To be
right.
disconnected from life in some way. We can't
Yes.
lead, we can't live, we can't love, right?
That's
And
right.
so that work is helping us to excavate why, like, why is the state of my life the way that it is? And then to do
Right.
all the work to shed it and get rid of it. But that is really painful work. And so without that fuel from hope, you're not going to make it through the evolve process.
Right.
The word, so the A is and for me, and this is the bridge, because as you do that self discovery work and you discover who you were always meant to be,
Yes.
that discovery starts to give way to love. And it
Mm,
begins, you're in a transition phase because you're beginning with self love. Oh, like I know who I'm actually meant to be, and that you love that person. You learn to
yeah.
love that person. Self love is where it starts. So of course that means that the L is love. And that is across all types of relationships. And so what we're learning there is how we show up in love and how we give
Mhm,
and receive love in relationships. And you have
yeah.
to understand what that means for you before you can begin to really apply that and extend it to other relationships, right? And there's some hard work that comes there too, because there is a phase there where you're evaluating existing relationships, right? And a lot of the relationships that we have are problematic because they come from our wounds and our survival
Correct.
patterns, right? And so
Yes.
you have to go through a process of figuring out what you're going to do with those. And the story that I told you about my ex-husband is a great story about what happens with one of those, right? And so,
Yeah.
I held that relationship for a long time, which by the way, I've only recently come to understand was a true soul contract between the two of
Mm,
us. And hypnotherapy was the day the soul contract did for me. That was it. It
yeah.
was done. I was finished and
Yeah.
moving on, right? But
Yeah.
then there's the practical reality of what does this look like. And so I had held that relationship for the period of time that I needed it in my life, but I no longer needed it. And so I had to make a decision about what am I going to do with it. And ultimately for me, the decision on that one was to let it go. Right.
Right.
And so this is where we have conversations about, is this a relationship I can keep with boundaries? Is the person going to honor the boundaries? We talk about those kind of things when we're
Mhm,
in the love phase. So that, for me, that's what it means to heal. And it's a lifelong
mhm,
process that you learn the first time you go through it in the very deep and long, for me, 45 years of stuff I had to deal with it. But
mhm,
now I know what I'm doing, right? Life goes on. The healing journey never ends. Although I do say if there's a destination on the journey, it is love, because
mm,
that's what we're after, right? That's the
mhm.
foundation of who we are as human beings, right? It's what
Yes.
makes connection and relationships rich and deep.
Yes.
And but what I find now is that I know what I'm doing. And so when I have something that happens to me that's hurtful, and whether, I haven't suffered some really like big T type trauma events that I suffered in high school. And then probably argue that my whole time with my ex-husband was one of those big giant events like that. But most of what we experience are the daily interactions with people who aren't in the place that I'm in. They haven't done their healing work. They really can't love us the way that we deserve to be loved and that they should love us. They're not able
Right.
to do it for one reason or another. That hurts. Every day we have those interactions, it hurts. And so we're constantly healing those kind of wounds, right? And so,
Right.
but what I found though is that I have great stories about this too, is that I'm much faster and more resilient now. And I can see that improvement in the
Yep.
last 6 years.
Yep.
I laugh and I say it took me 30 years to see it the first time with my ex-husband. I was in a 2-year relationship with someone where it was like my remedial lesson out of the pan and into the fire. That one only
Right.
took me 2 years to see, and then I have something else that happened where I could actually get through it in a couple of days, right? And so it just it's just much faster now, right? And that's what
Yeah.
we're really hoping to learn.
That's fantastic.
I do, apply that in the personal setting. I mean, I also now the other thing that I do is I take that back into the leadership, back into the business world, because now what I see very clearly is that even some of my leadership behaviors, some of the things that I did as a leader came from my survival patterns. And,
Yeah.
if you think of, I know a lot of, most of us are carrying survival patterns, and we spend so much time at work. And those are most of the time relationships with people that are going to be pushing on those things, triggering us. And so
Mhm.
I work with people to how to become leaders, identifying and dealing with this. It's root cause of work, which is what I've done my entire life. Root cause analysis. Let's figure out the root cause, tell the truth, deal with
Yes.
it, move on. Right? That's clean it out, move on. That's what I've done my entire life, and I'm just
Right.
now doing it to help people hopefully get closer to the place that I'm in today.
Yeah. Okay, you talked about self-love and cultivating self-love, and I think
Mhm,
I can just look at my own experience. I've
mhm,
operated out of my wounding for years and years and years, and just in the last 2 years, I have started to develop and cultivate self-love, self-compassion. I'm curious, what are some of the tactics and strategies that you've shared either with your clients or that you use to help cultivate and build that self-love?
Yeah, so I would say it starts with tearing down. And when I say tearing down, that's the inner critic and the imposter syndrome. And the
Yeah,
vast majority of us who have come from that wounding have it to some degree, right? I mean, I started
absolutely.
out by talking about like looking over and seeing, I think I mentioned imposter syndrome early on, right?
Mhm.
So I
Sure.
just came to understand the extent of my imposter syndrome. And
Okay.
so tearing that down, which I don't think it ever goes away. And then I had a really loud and nasty inner critic. And so I had to do the work to quieten her, right? Then I've had to do a lot of inner child work. And I think this is something that we also can miss when we're working on self love is
Yeah.
going back. And somebody described it to me a while back is going back and nurturing the child that was never nurtured as the child, right? And so
Yes.
literally she's like, if you're 45 years old and you want to go swing on a swing set or get on a seesaw, go get on the swing set, right?
Yeah.
Giving to ourselves, right? This notion of play. We all, when we go through those things, mine started at 5, right? That day when my grandfather sexually abused me, he chained me to the foundation of that wall that I would
Mm.
build for 45 years. That's
Mhm.
literally what happened to me that day when he abused me.
Yeah.
And that means I didn't have a childhood, right? And so, and for me, I don't even remember the vast majority of the memories are just gone. And so going back and paying attention to those inner children, and I can say children because I have 3 of them, but I've worked with the 5-year-old the longest, healing them, right? My
Yes.
5-year-old existed, her entire existence as my inner child was about hiding and keeping us small. Newsflash for you, that's not what I do now. I mean, I do this all the time, right? I'm very public with my story and my message. You
Mhm.
can't be small and hide, but I've had to heal her, right? And get her to
Mm.
trust me. And I've been
Right.
through I do a lot of very visual, energetic healing through EMDR and Reiki and
Love
other
it.
types of therapies, even some of my own like somatic movement and my own running and walking. And I've had some very involved uh,
Mm.
processes and time with her, right? Getting her to
Yes.
cross this bridge with me, this nasty Indiana Jones type
Yeah.
falling apart across this gorge in the Amazon jungle somewhere, right? And trying to get her
Mhm.
to trust me enough to go across that bridge. And it took me a long time to get her to hold my hand and get off. I mean, we got to the edge. It was a long time to get her to take the first step and go over that, right? And that is all healing. And all of that is about self-love, right? So there's the tearing down and there's the building up. I think, we just skip to self-love is, I'm going to take a pause right now on this day that I've been working so crazy and, it's 4 o'clock. I haven't gotten up from my desk. I'm going to get up for 30 minutes. And we call that self-love.
Self-love.
I'm going to breathe while I'm up for the 30 minutes and I might do some stretching or I'm going to go to yoga tonight. We call that self-love, right? That is giving to ourselves and nourishing ourselves. But we have to go through the process of recognizing the parts of us that are there that just need to go. Yes. Recognizing the parts of us that have never been nurtured and loved.
Yes.
Then coming around to the nourishment, the daily nourishment. And so I live my life now, like every decision that I make today is self-love driven. So from the smallest to the biggest, every decision I make is based on what do I want, right? So, by the way, self-love also, and this is kind of where the self-discovery starts going into the self-love part, but it's cultivating that self-love, right? It's going through a process of identifying wants and needs and emotional needs, right? Because we don't know that either. I literally, the first time my therapist said to me, what are your emotional needs? I'm sure I looked at her like she had 5 heads. I was like,
totally. Yeah.
She gave me this,
no idea.
After a few weeks, she gave me this piece of paper and she's like, these are common emotional needs. I was like, oh, great. And that sat on my night table for weeks. And then one day, yes, the wheel, which I love your wheel. It's beautiful.
I love the wheel.
It's so bright and colorful, which I love it, right? It's so much. It's amazing. That piece of paper sat on my desk, on my night table for weeks. And one day I'm on the phone. This is after my ex had gone to Bangkok. And I don't know when this was, and that sometime toward the end of 2020. And we're having an argument and we're like, it's just because I'm in that emotive state, right? And we're arguing. And I look over at the night table and like literally 3 words, like you see like in the, Harry Potter and the words start to move, or the witches movies, they start to move on the pages. They're like literally dancing on the page. And I was like, it was literally the first time. And it was because what I was not getting from him emotionally was being triggered by the interaction, but I had enough sitting in my mind because we've been having these conversations and I've been staring at this piece of paper for like 6 weeks at that point in time that it just crystallized. And I was like, and that was the beginning of me understanding my emotional needs. And then I realized I've never had this before, which was the problem in my marriage, right? I don't have this in my marriage, right? All of that is about cultivating self-love because now I know what I need, right? I'm married again now, just got married in February to an amazing man. And one of the number one things that he does is hits every one of my emotional needs.
Yeah.
Right? So the decision to bring him into my life and to marry him was driven. And everybody says, well, of course, my decision to marry somebody is driven by me. Really? Because my first marriage wasn't. My first marriage was driven by a need to feel abandoned and be in a relationship where I felt abandoned because that's what I'd always experienced growing up.
That's
it was
right.
familiar.
That's right.
I got into that relationship because it felt familiar. It was not driven by self-love. My marriage now, driven by self-love because I know me and I know what I need. And he meets those needs for me.
Yeah.
That is daily, regular nourishment of self-love.
Yeah.
Is understanding those things about ourselves and making sure that we're constantly meeting.
Yeah.
And yes, I do try to get out for my walks regularly. I'm not a yoga person. I love Pilates. If I could find mat Pilates here, I would do that. Right. Spiritual nourishment is part of my self-love, like getting nourished spiritually the way I need to be nourished and the way I connect with God. Yes, I do all of that kind of stuff.
I love
but
that.
It's that inner work about self that we miss when we talk about self-love.
Well, and I think what's fascinating too, because some of the work that I've done in therapy is using internal family systems or parts therapy. And that in that work, I've had to go back and connect with 8-year-old Molly and the different versions. And that is very profound work to go back and meet the younger versions of yourself and walk through those scenarios and give them what they need in that moment. But that's about connection. That's connecting back to that version of you that needed the love, the reassurance, the encouragement, whatever it was. And I absolutely the foundation of creating and cultivating self-love. And congratulations to you in finding this amazing man
Yes, I'm
who
blessed.
checks all the boxes. That's so for somebody who has started waking up to parts of themselves that they've ignored or buried or hidden for years, what would you want them to know about what comes next?
Well, if you're just starting to wake up, that probably means that you have something gnawing at you, right? There's an inner knowing that's there. You need to
Mm,
go with it. And
go with it.
so, not turning away from it, and it's scary. And that can be it's an easy thing to do, right? Escape is
Yeah,
something that, I mean, I did it for many years. That's what a lot of people do, right? I think it's a lot of times where the misuse of substances comes into play. That's the one we think about a lot, but there are other forms of
sure.
addiction too, right? The misuse of
Hmm.
anything for purposes of numbing, escaping, right? If you have, which I mean, all of us have some of those behaviors to a certain extent in our life.
Oh, sure.
If you've got those and you're feeling a discomfort, like your inner knowing is telling you
Mm,
something that is not, you need to pay attention to it. For me, it's like we always just talk about in the investigations, right? We huge, massive global investigations with
yeah.
massive amounts of data, and we're like literally looking for the. Somebody said we're looking for the. I heard somebody say recently we were looking for the haystack in the haystacks and then the needle in that haystack, right? And that's true. Like that's what it is like, right?
Sure.
But we always talked about pulling the threads, right? So you would get a
Mm,
tip, right? You would pull the thread. Well, what's that about? Let's unravel that, pull it out and see what it's about. That's what you need to do, right? And that
yeah.
goes back to the tools that I was talking about. How are you going to get through that process? What do you need to have on board to pull that thread, right? It may be therapy. If you're dealing with trauma, it probably is a trauma therapist, right?
Sure.
Maybe it's Reiki. Maybe it's, I mean, I've done all kind of different types of therapy. Somatic movement therapy is the thing that actually started helping me to really emote. And actually, a couple of years before the hypnotherapy, I had no idea what was happening at that time.
Yeah.
I tell people it was like the cork shooting out of the champagne bottle, and as movement therapy that I had, just something that came out of me, but I had no idea. It was like the last traumatic event I experienced. It was the emotions with the
Mm,
last, what I would say to you is the last real trauma event that I had experienced at that point in time. The cork of that came out when I released the words, what had happened,
yeah.
but it was still 2 years before I got to the hypnotherapy. But going with the feeling and finding your path, your tools that are going to help you to do the excavation work, right?
Mm,
To understand what's happened to you and why you're living your life the way you're living it. You're at the tip of the iceberg, but I would also say that the door is opening for you. I think of it, for me, it was being dropped at the gateway to my healing journey, and it was
yeah.
the greatest gift I've ever received in my life, was to be put in that place. And I've said this, or I'm
Yeah.
gonna say it again. I mean, it was painful, right? And so my healing journey, there have been times when I will tell you it's the most excruciating thing I've ever done in my life, but it's also the most beautiful and the
Mm,
most rewarding. And if you're in that place, you've been dropped there, like you're hearing me and go with it. Don't turn away. Take the
yeah.
next step. And the next step is to start getting the help to do the self discovery work.
And I know it feels overwhelming
Yes.
to dig into this, but
Yes.
there's so much goodness that comes out of the funk, the trauma, or whatever. But going through that process is 100% worth it. So,
Yes, it is.
oh, oh my God.
100%.
Beth,
Yes.
thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. And
Yeah.
you guys, I'll put how to connect with Beth in the show notes. And please, if you know somebody who has experienced sexual abuse or any type of trauma and they could benefit from hearing Beth's story and knowing that there's hope and there's love on the other side of healing from this, please consider sharing it with them. Also, guys, I'm on a mission equipping 1 million people to pivot out of the funk. And so by sharing this, by rating, reviewing, and subscribing, you're doing me a solid and supporting what I'm doing here. And I would absolutely love that support. With that, we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.